Just one day after laying his brother George Floyd to rest in Houston, Villainese Floyd delivered an emotional plea to House lawmakers on Capitol Hill yesterday.
George wasn't hurting anyone that day. He didn't deserve to die over $20. I'm asking you, is that what a black man is worth? $20? 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
It was incredibly powerful. The House Judiciary Committee hearing on police brutality came just days after House Democrats introduced a sweeping legislation on police reform. The proposed bill would ban chokeholds and end racial and religious profiling, and also eliminate judicial immunity for officers charged with abuse. CBS News political reporter Grace Segers is joining us now to talk more about this. So Grace, that testimony by George Floyd's brother, as I said, was just incredibly powerful. And it reminded me, towards the very end of his statement, he just said that he wishes that he could have his brother back. A very different sentiment than one that was expressed by the President of the United States last week when he indicated this was a happy day for George, when he was talking about the things that are happening across the country, in addition to the jobs numbers. Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so it was very heart-wrenching to listen to Villainese Floyd's testimony as he talked about the pain of losing his brother. And remember, this is very fresh for him. He only had the funeral for his brother this week. His brother died only a few weeks ago, and he's already testifying before Congress, talking about the pain he's feeling. And something that really struck me that he spoke about was talking about how he had to watch the video of his brother being killed, and how kids all across the country, how his brother's children have to watch that video, and how that's going to haunt him for the rest of his life, knowing that his brother's final moments were captured on video.
So the Justice in Policing Act is the act that the House Democrats have proposed. Senate Republicans are working on their own police reform bill. As I understand it, there's a lot of overlap, but there are also some key differences. What do we know about what Republicans are doing?
So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tapped Senator Tim Scott, who is the only Black Republican senator, to spearhead these efforts. And we don't know exactly what's going to be in Scott's bill yet, but we do know a few things. So unlike the House Democrats' bill, his bill wouldn't ban chokeholds and ban no-knock warrants in drug cases, but would instead gather data on chokeholds and on no-knock warrants. And Scott is also focusing on improving training, police training, with the objective of, if training is improved, then police officers would be less likely to act aggressively in the streets. There is some overlap, however. Republicans and Democrats have been saying that they could agree on a few things. So we'll have to see what exactly those things may be.
Yeah, Grace, it was interesting. You probably, as I did, noted a couple of tweets yesterday from Senator Scott about this. And for our viewers who may not have seen them, I'll read some of them. He said in one tweet, "Not surprising, the last 24 hours have seen a lot of token," he put in quotes, "or boy," or quote, "you're being used in my mention. Let me get this straight. You don't want the person who has faced racial profiling by police, been pulled over dozens of times, or been speaking out for years drafting this, and don't throw out 'you're the only Black they know' at me either. There are only 2 Black Democratic senators. Stop pretending there's some huge racial diversity gap in the Senate. Ask my Democratic colleagues what their staffs look like. I guarantee you won't like the answer." So pushing back on some of the criticisms that he has faced, rightfully so. But I do wonder, Grace, I mean, what is the rationale from Republicans not banning chokeholds? I mean, to me, that would strike me as sort of a slam dunk to say that, look, we're listening to the voices in the millions that are taking to the streets to protest police brutality. One thing that we can do is to better train officers so that they don't have to use this chokehold, which, as we know, has led to countless deaths like George Floyd.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because the idea, again, is that these questions would be addressed in police training. So if you make training more sensitive to issues of race, if you train police officers to use force as a last resort, the idea is that chokeholds and no-knock warrants wouldn't be used except for in what could be considered necessary cases. Now, opponents of this may think, well, it's never necessary to use a chokehold against a citizen.
You know, the issue, part of the problem or the challenge, I think, with chokeholds, not that it isn't a no-brainer, I sort of agree with you, Vlad, but if you remember the case of Eric Garner, ultimately, when the investigation was done and over with, the conclusion was that the officer inadvertently had placed Eric Garner in a chokehold, that it had not been a deliberate tactic. And I think, part of the pushback, one could argue, is, these reforms are important, but they're only one step in a whole host of things that have to change about the system to ensure accountability. I was trying to look up very quickly, but I believe New York City chokeholds have been banned for a very long time, and the conclusion was, that the chokehold was just something that happened by mistake, and that resulted ultimately, eventually, in the death of Eric Garner. Just going to throw that out there. But I want to talk about this. Democrats are pushing to have the bill put up for a vote in the House by the end of the month. How likely is that to happen? Do we expect any? I suppose we can expect some major changes to the proposal, but perhaps not. But what's the prognosis, if you will, for this bill?
Well, it's very likely that this bill is going to pass in the House. It's likely that it'll pass in the House by the end of this month because the House, as we know, is controlled by Democrats. This bill has hundreds of Democratic sponsors, so it's very popular among the Democratic members of the House. However, we also know that its chances in the Senate are a lot less likely of passing. It's not as sure of a thing. It's not a sure thing at all. So what we could see is maybe Senator Scott coming up with his own bill, the White House saying what they were interested in, maybe even some House Republicans saying what they would be willing to look at, and maybe the House Democrats will then look at that and make changes to their own bill. I would suspect, however, that this bill is going to pass as is in the House.
All right. Grace Segers, always great to talk to you about your reporting, Grace. And also, I should point out to our viewers that a lot of your reporting, in addition to appearing on CBSNews.com, also appears on your Twitter feed at Grace Segers. So I encourage our viewers to check out your Twitter feed. It's something that I do at least like 20 times a day. So it's always good to get you on the air, too, to talk about your reporting. We appreciate it.
Thank you.